Good morning, everyone. We will start this coordination in 2 minutes.
Doon na lang sa table ko.
Doon na lang. Okay.
Or sige, pwede rin.
Gusto ko na lang dito ba para mas dito.
Sige.
Or doon. Para mas dito.
Hindi, mas importante ang speakers.
Pwede ko namang i-zoom yan. Papunta ko sa kanila.
Hindi.
Pwede. Ayaw. Pero pumagos na.
Or
dito.
before we
Mataas naman doon.
Sa table ko na. Sa table ko na.
please in the seats. Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So welcome to this debriefing regarding the current situation here at COP29 vis-a-vis the situation regarding climate anomaly that's currently going on in the Philippines. And we'd like to mention 6 names in particular: Kristine, Leon, Marce, Nika, Ofel, Pepito. These are the local names given to the 6 tropical cyclones that have hit the Philippines in the span of 1 minute. And here at the halfway mark of COP29, we are organizing this media briefing to present the perspectives and positions Philippine civil society and community representatives about demands, calls, and aspirations, not just about the outcomes that are expected to happen here in Baku for the climate negotiations, but also at the national level. Because at the moment in the Philippines, in the midst as well of the 6 storms in 1 month situation, the national government is currently undergoing budget deliberations. And now, we would like to start by acknowledging the presence of our media colleagues from the Philippines, from Timor-Leste, where are you from? Act Alliance. Thank you. So we are very glad that we could also attend this meeting for this morning, as well as our colleagues online, including from the representative from RACU. So now we would like to introduce our panelists for this media briefing this morning. First, I would like to introduce the National Convener of Aksyon Klima Pilipinas, also leading Biodiversity Philippines, Mr. Rodne Galicha. We have also on board the Deputy Executive Director for the Center for Energy, Ecology and Development, Attorney Avril de Torres. The Climate Justice Portfolio Manager of Oxfam Pilipinas, Mr. Chester Pagulayan. And the Humanitarian Response Program Manager for the National Council of Churches of the Philippines Act Alliance, Ms. Patricia Mungcal. We will also be joined later by the Executive Director of Greenpeace Southeast Asia, Mr. Naderev Saño, who is running from another meeting. So now, we would like to give the floor first to Mr. Rodne Galicha.
Thank you, JL. As we all know, the Philippines has been experiencing many tropical cyclones in the last 4 years. For the last 4 weeks, as John Leo said, we have the local names Kristine, Leon, Marce, Nika, Ofel, and Pepito. And generally, typhoons in the Philippines, as we see it, is more than the alphabets. Sometimes we repeat the alphabets to name our typhoons. These did not occur in the span of months, but within the past 4 weeks. And it is nearly unprecedented phenomenon in recent history. Yet, given what the nation has endured this year alone, it is undeniable that the new normal is here and now. And let me articulate the message statement of Aksyon Klima Pilipinas, on the largest network of climate action in the Philippines. All of these taking place as the Philippine government is representing the country at the 2024 UN climate negotiations here in Baku. And we know that COP29 is branded as the finance COP. The nations are discussing how to provide the needed finance and support for developing countries to address the impacts of the climate crisis, including averting and minimizing LNT. We remember our colleague Naderev Saño, then Commissioner and Negotiator of the Philippines, standing out in front of the climate negotiations when Typhoon Haiyan of Yolanda hit the Philippines. The Philippines was struck by Super Typhoon Yolanda Haiyan, which triggered a chain of events that firmly established loss and damage as the third pillar of global climate action. And for us, now is the time for developed countries to deliver on setting an ambitious new finance goal amounting to $1.3 trillion in climate finance that would ultimately contribute to preventing more LND. And we support also the call of our Philippine negotiators to ensure that LND is included in this new finance goal. Additionally, we urge also that LND finance must be obligatory. And this includes also a target amounting for addressing this issue. And as the host of the board of the fund for responding to loss and damage, the country is in an influential position to demand accountability from big polluters, persuade other developing nations to fight for ecological debt to be paid to us, and invite everyone to work together to uphold climate justice and ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodne Galicha of Aksyon Klima Pilipinas. We'd like now to give the floor to Attorney Avril de Torres of Center for Energy, Ecology and
Thank you, JL. Good morning, everyone. and good afternoon to those joining us from the Philippines. For the sake of our colleagues, outside of the Philippines or our colleagues here who are internationals, then I could speak mainly in English. The Philippines is in the middle of a climate anomaly. Since the 1950s, it has not happened that 4 typhoons are hitting the Philippines at the same time. And in a span of 4 weeks, we have 6 typhoons battering our country. Before we talk about what's happening in the climate negotiations, positions of the Philippine delegation, I would like to first talk about what's happening on the home front. And it's very unfortunate and it's very difficult to hear that while we are in these negotiation halls pushing for the most ambitious climate action and climate justice, in our own shores, we have just opened the floodgates for gas expansion. I also joined the press briefing of Aksyon Klima just a few days ago and already shared a lot about what's happening on the home front. In just a few days ago, we published our report entitled Southeast Asia at the Crossroads, declaring a fossil future for Southeast Asia with renewables. And we already shared there that Southeast Asia as a region is leading gas expansion in the world. And the Philippines has one of the biggest planned gas power projects in the region, second only to Vietnam. And we are the biggest developer of LNG import terminals. But on the first day of COP, we learned that the Senate passed a bill which will now incentivize gas expansion in the Philippines and will also mandate our power distribution utilities to keep increasing the share of gas in our power mix. Not only that, in the middle of week 1 of the climate negotiations, the House adopted the Senate's version in full. And so we expect to come home to the Philippines after these negotiations with gas being fully incentivized and promoted back. Tomorrow, the Department of Energy will be hosting a gas summit. And amidst these negotiations as well, we learned that the Philippine National Oil Company has entered into agreement with Indonesia's Pertamina to explore and collaborate on the development of LNG market in the Philippines. Of course, there are also other concerning developments here where now we're talking about carbon offsets, which we are among the organizations which believe that there's no room for offsets in a 1.5 degrees Celsius world, considering how far we are from meeting this target. And we are concerned that this will only further displace ambition. We don't have to say it, but amidst gas expansion that's happening on the home front and in Southeast Asia, it's worth reiterating again and again that methane is responsible for around 30% of the rise in global temperature since the Industrial Revolution, and rapid and sustained reductions of methane emissions is key to limit near-term warming. And so we question amidst continuous push for another fossil fuel backbone and in our own region, what kind of climate anomaly has to happen for us to finally abandon fossil fuels and to push for genuine solutions in the form of renewable energy? We want to reiterate that there is hope. In the same report that we published, we found that the Philippines is in fact leading renewable energy expansion in Southeast Asia. We have the biggest planned renewable energy projects at 160 gigawatts, mostly coming from solar and wind. And so we need the Philippine government to focus on renewable energy development and to focus on addressing challenges, because we also know, for those who are following what's happening in the green energy auction program in the Philippines, that there are around 105 contracts that are being threatened of termination. And also, we want to emphasize that a report from Climate Analytics has already found that if we align to the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway for the power sector, this would be more jobs for Filipinos, cheaper or more affordable electricity, and more reliable electricity for us as well. Against the backdrop of this climate anomaly and the renewable energy leadership of the Philippines, we believe that the Philippines is in the position to be the most vocal in asserting the highest delivery of finance, mainly public finance and grant space that should cover mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. And this is also against the backdrop of our finding in the report that it's mainly global north still and East Asian firms that are funding fossil fuel expansion in Southeast Asia, while domestic firms are supporting renewable energy expansion. So we know that climate finance that we win here should support ambitious and enhanced NDCs, and we are concerned that we will not have more ambitious NDCs if this is what's happening on the home front. We cannot continue to promote fossils in our own shores and call for ambitious climate action and climate justice here at COP.
Thank you, Attorney Avril de Torres of C. We would like now next to give the floor to Mr. Chester Pagulayan of Oxfam Pilipinas.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying that I am from Cagayan province, where most of the 6 typhoons made landfall and are making landfall. These typhoons hitting the country at this time of the year is not a surprise for us, but it is uncommon for 6 back-to-back typhoons with equally catastrophic impacts to happen. This is not right. In our recent carbon inequality report, Carbon Inequality Kills report at Oxfam, we found out that 50 of the world's richest billionaires on average emit more carbon pollution through their investments, private jets, and yachts in 90 minutes than the average person does in their life. Again, this is not right. Someone clearly has to pay. Rich countries owe the world, specifically the global south, at least $5 trillion a year in climate debt reparations. Oxfam estimates that low and middle income countries will need at least $2.5 trillion per year by 2030 to meet its climate goals. Of this amount, $1.5 trillion a year will need to come from public climate finance, mostly grants and not loans. We stand in solidarity with the people who are being impacted by these typhoons. We need the Philippine government to stand in solidarity with its people and the global South population to demand climate accountability and climate justice. We need the Philippine negotiators at COP29 to bring a stronger voice in the negotiation tables to demand just finance for loss and damage, and to allow just transition for workers and communities. Currently, in the Just Transition Work Program, we're seeing pushback from the global north in the language of international cooperation that the just transition has to be nationally determined. But we have to acknowledge the common but differentiated responsibilities and respected capacities of countries and parties that for us in the global south, the transition away from fossil fuels, from pollutive and extractive practices, we need resources, may that be from international resources, may that be from our own domestic finances, to enable a just transition. I think we have to be more, as a global south, we have to stand in solidarity with each other in this battle for climate justice and climate accountability to the global government. And now, I think for COP29, we are saying this is the finance COP. We have to have a stronger language on human rights, equity, and justice in every negotiating text, we can also to highlight, the different impacts, that the climate crisis has. To women, to indigenous people, to young people, to farmers, to fisher folks who are impacted by the climate crisis. And a great example is what we're experiencing right now. Again, someone clearly has to pay. And our call for COP29 is for global North countries to pay up for climate finance, for the global North to pay up for their pollutive practices. Again, we want climate justice. We demand climate accountability. And for COP29, I hope that we, for the second week of COP29, I hope that we see that stronger voice from Philippine government, from our global South allies in the negotiating tables as we close this conference of the parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chester Pagulayan of Oxfam Pilipinas. I'd like now to give the floor next to Ms. Patricia Mungcal of NCCP Architects.
Firstly, I want to thank the organizers of this press conference for holding this space for us to demand accountability for the climate injustices that are happening now in the Philippines. And thank you to our media friends for helping us deliver this message publicly, because this emergency and our demand for accountability is a message that the world needs to know. As a faith-based humanitarian worker and climate justice activist, I want to tell you, like the others have already mentioned, that 6 typhoons in 4 weeks, 2 of which were called super typhoons, are not normal, even for the Philippines, the top disaster-prone country in the world and one of the most at risk in terms of climate change impacts. And I have to emphasize that this happened after a scorching drought caused by El Niño, the worst in a decade, and also a series of powerful storms and typhoons earlier this year. All in all, the true cost of these crises totals to not less than $406 million worth of damages just to agriculture and infrastructures. The majority of the people who have been repeatedly battered by this series of typhoons are farmers, the poorest sector in the country. The agricultural losses mean further debt, further hunger, further losses, further poverty, and further injustice. Every disaster in the Philippines also exposes the lie that we as a nation is disaster prepared, as communities are repeatedly devastated, and government actions would only be reactive to the aftermath of each disaster. It would always be insufficient and palliative. Its failure to address the climate crisis and opening the floodgates for more environmental destruction and vulnerability is criminal negligence to the country. And I want to emphasize, we do have local capacities and initiatives in the communities for disaster preparedness, humanitarian response, and climate change adaptation. But these are gravely exhausted, unsupported, underfinanced, and even criminalized, given our rights situation in the country. It is an injustice to be plagued by disasters for the climate crisis we, the people, did not create. That is to say, we are bearing the heaviest brunt of this crisis, despite contributing the least to its causes. And we are firm that the world's largest carbon emitters have the primary responsibility for the climate catastrophe in the Philippines and has a climate debt to pay. As global leaders negotiate over the accountabilities here in COP29, and I would emphasize on the word negotiate, I want to emphasize that climate finance is not a discussion of fundraising, but a demand for responsibility. As the National Council of Churches in the Philippines joins the ACT Alliance, Actions by Churches Together, I would like to highlight our demands for climate finance. It should come as grants, not loans, be accessible to civil society, and climate finance goals and commitments should be concrete, urgent, transparent, and sufficient in addressing the climate emergency. With proper finance for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, the Philippines could be the disaster-prepared nation we really wish it to be. It is the responsibility of the large carbon-emitting nations, mostly from the global north, to meet their obligation to provide that finance. As NCCP, we commit ourselves to being vigilant against inaction and false solutions that fail to address the root causes of the climate crisis and its impacts, and against deceptive greenwashing tactics that let greed for profit trump the integrity of creation. Beyond COP29, the churches shall remain steadfast in our role as faithful stewards by accompanying the most vulnerable and the most affected by the climate crisis as they stand up for their rights and dignity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patricia Mungcal of NCCP ACT Alliance. So for now, we will give also an opportunity for some of our other colleagues from the non-government sector in the Philippines to present their insights about the progress of COP29 and their demands to governments, including in the Philippines, about climate change. For now, I'd like to give the floor first to a representative from the Workers for Just Transition, among others, Mr. Julius Bain.
Thank you very much, JF. First off, I'd like to thank our colleagues at the civil society, because it's not every day that civil society percent workers work together. But here at this COP29, especially, we have seen how civil society in the Philippines and trade unions, including the Workers for Just Transition, especially, and the Federation of the Workers, to work together with the CSO COP29 delegation. First, talking about disasters, when disasters strike, like the typhoons that have come and will continue to come in the Philippines, the most vulnerable workers, the daily paid workers, do not get paid, do not get anything when they are forced not to report for work because of disasters. Unlike those monthly paid, they get payments for even if not performing work because they are monthly paid. So the more vulnerable you are, the more susceptible you are to climate disasters. And we have come to the point in our history where the cycle has widened because after the typhoon cycle, this time of the year, we'll be bracing for the heat stroke, heat stress, and other heat-related disasters come March, April, and even earlier by February. And suffice to say, there's not enough structure, there is not enough mechanisms with our existing social protection mechanisms that would protect workers both during typhoons and during heat waves. So one of our points here is that the Just Transition work program should, of course, include not only workers' rights, but social protection. Without social protection, there won't be a Just Transition work program that will really work for the benefit of the marginalized. And I speak because I come from a position where we see that there is a lot of weakness in our social protection institutions. For one, the Employees Compensation Commission has not even completed giving all of its employment compensation benefits to COVID-19 victims. And we're talking about cases of COVID-19 from 2020 to 2021, where not all of them have been compensated yet. Second, of course, we are very much aware that the PhilHealth has returned funds to the national government when there is a big gap in terms of the services that they have to deliver. For example, we have workers, members from hospital unions who've been complaining that they haven't been getting their benefits, and their employers have not been able to give all of the benefits they're entitled to, precisely because the PhilHealth is not reimbursed. The PhilHealth is not reimbursed their offices. So if we have a weak social protection system, then there will be a failure of just transition. Most of the things that government does, mostly post-disaster, is provide emergency employment. And I think this is not sustainable. So if we're only pegged, or if we're only tied to providing temporary emergency employment for workers affected by climate disasters, then we're in for a bigger disaster, because most of these displacement might eventually become permanent displacements. And perhaps my last point would be on the social security system. The SSS has been complaining that it's going to be drying up its funds in the next few years. But I think there's one thing that Congress can do to help the SSS build up its finances. And I'm talking about providing living wages for workers, because of course the SSS is mainly a contributory social protection scheme, and the more capacity the workers have to contribute to the social security system, the more services it would be able to give to workers, especially those who would be eventually become victims of climate disasters. And so we ask from the global north that they have to pay up for climate finance for just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jude Statement, representing the Workers for Just Transition. And we have also here joining us to represent the indigenous peoples of the Philippines. We have here representing the Cordillera People's Alliance. So wondering.
Good morning, this is afternoon. Thank you for this space. I'm Rodne Galicha. I'm from the Center for Development Programs in the Cordillera, but I am here in behalf of the Cordillera People's Alliance. And that's precisely my message for today. We are missing people who are in the best position to deliver and propose things, especially in relation to just transition and in relation to finance, climate finance. We are in the region of very rich indigenous peoples territories in the Cordillera and elsewhere in the world are rich in natural resources, important, very important in the just transition. And also, we have very rich river systems that can produce hydropower as energy. In the course of defending our natural resources and in the course of elaborating means and ways where we can use these natural resources in a just, equitable, and righteous transition, our leaders are being designated as terrorists under public transfer. If we want to really get the position of these people, we have to give space for environmental defenders who are being designated as terrorists, and most are being. There will be a lot of indigenous peoples communities that will not that will be excluded from all of this climate finance, if their bank accounts are being frozen and if they are being tagged as terrorists. In the course of if we are looking for climate finance and just transition, let us give space for people being excluded and potentially being excluded for having access to this space, for elaboration and participation, and space and access to climate finance and voices are just and righteous answer. So let me just give, if we are talking of in the past 4 weeks, there are 6 types in the Philippines. In the past 4 weeks, we have 5 human rights defenders who were just filing complaints of terrorist financing for in our region and one in South Africa. Just for one human rights defender there in Southern Tagalog. Accordingly, or is claimed or filed complaint of feeding armed rebels. One from our region, Naderev, an indigenous woman, is being charged of selling goods and stuff to armed rebels in their community. One NGO, our colleague, you know, from the Coordinated People's Alliance, NGOs like our NGOs who have been associated with the Coordinated People's Alliance are now being investigated for not financing terrorism because we were we had been supporting we are partners with the Coordinated People's Alliance. So one of our colleagues was charged with giving $200 for one who claimed to be a former member of the Communist Party of the Philippines, was given $200 to participate in a conference in Thailand on a campaign against tobacco advertisement. And one for giving 35,000 for this so-called former Communist Party member participate in relief services and campaign in relation to support farmers' rights. Those are just examples. And and of course, 4 of the leaders of the Coordinated People's Alliance are challenging the constitutionality of the terrorist designation. Having been designated as terrorists wrongfully and unjust. Thank you. Thank you for this.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rodne, representing the Cordillera People's Alliance and the indigenous communities they have in the Cordillera region specifically. So we'll now open the floor to our media colleagues on-site and online for any questions you may have to any of our speakers in this meeting. Please go ahead. Ms. Naderev, please go ahead.
Thank you, JL, and good morning. We know that at midpoint, progress has been very slow and the direction of agreement remains unclear. But what are you optimistic about in this COP for the in terms of for the Philippines in terms of finance and fossil fuel transition, and what COP30 in Brazil need to do moving forward? Thank you.
We're in midway. We're optimistic that many developing countries and small island states are pushing for the inclusion of loss and damage and the institution. Further, we are urging also and lobbying governments to have that loss and damage element as obligatory, because it's very important, or else it will be voluntary. Secondly, looking at COP30 for the Philippines, it's very, very relevant because it will be held in Brazil. And we know that that continent, that area in the world is nationally famous for resisting minerals extraction. And it's very similar to the Philippines, and the just transition to renewable energy is being used as a justification to open up areas for critical minerals. So that's why in the Philippines, we've been lobbying as well as civil society to repeal the Mining Act and put no-go zones, propose new bills such as People's Mining Bill and Alternative Minerals Management Bill to include climate and resiliency in the law, put no-go zones, and highlight the importance of conservation. So it's very important not only for the civil society in the Philippines, but of areas affected by mining to fully engage COP30. We know that just transition work program is still being debated, but the paper is not yet really that strong. We hope that that element in just transition will be addressed, such as the extraction, justification to transition to renewable energy. If communities are affected, communities are divided, biodiversity is reduced, then for us it's not actually just transition.
Thank you, Mr. Rodne Galicha. Would anybody else like to ask questions or comments? Please go ahead. From ABS News.
Good morning, Alex from ABS-CBN. I would like to ask if there's a specific amount that you're looking into specifically for the Philippines, for the demand you're asking from the global north, and if we would reach that, what would be the top priorities that our government should spend it on? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Cheng Pagulayan.
As I mentioned, for the civil society organizations here at COP, our demand is at least $5 billion. But I think now the development in the negotiations that we are quite happy that we're seeing in some of the discussions, the $1.3 trillion annually. But that has to be new ones, it has to be defined what the $1.3 trillion would constitute. So we want that amount to be the core financing. What do we mean by core? It has to be publicly financed and grants based, not loans. So anything, as a civil society, I think we have to be vigilant about that, qualification or like a criteria on the $1.3 trillion. And anything less than $1 trillion for the civil society is a failure to conquer.
Thank you, Mr. Pagulayan. Avril de Torres, see also like to answer the question.
Just to answer the second part of the question, where should it go? We have often heard already here that climate finance is not sufficient. That's why we were very adamant about what's happening. We in last year's climate negotiations did share to the Philippine delegation and to the Department of Energy the report from Climate Analytics, which shows that it's entirely feasible for us to align to a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway for the power sector. And unfortunately, still, the final Philippine energy plan that was published is not aligned to 1.5, continues under fossil fuel dependency. So for us, where should it go? That's part of the conversations here, making sure that climate finance will not use fossil fuels, and that it will go into mitigation, adaptation, and also damage, making sure that it will help raise ambition and not further fossil fuel dependency. So we're concerned, and that's what we're raising here. Because even if we push for that, and we're among the countries here asking for $1.3 trillion every year in public finance. But at home, what type of energy resources are we promoting? And that's still gas. So we believe we are capable and it's possible for us to promote renewable energy, and this is where we should be focusing our resources.
Yes, Patricia.
Just to add and to further give nuance on our demands on climate finance, it should also be accessible to civil society. But then again, the environment of the civil society in the Philippines should be improved, should be conducive, because as we heard earlier, it is a very precarious, dangerous nation for environmental defenders and humanitarian workers. If we have that resource available, if we have achieved that climate finance goal and it has been allocated to the Philippines, where does it go now? Where does it go then? It should, the community-based organizations at the grassroots level should have access to those grants, to those finance, and should be supported in building their resilience, disaster preparedness, and adaptation initiatives. But we cannot do this in such a precarious civil society space in the Philippines, given our human rights situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patricia Mungcal. For now, we would like to welcome to our panel here the Executive Director for Greenpeace Southeast Asia, and would like to give him a few minutes to also present his insights about this whole situation here in COP29 and back home in the Philippines. Please welcome Mr. Naderev Saño.
Thank you very much, Chair, and magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Again, my name is John Leo Algo from Greenpeace Southeast Asia. State of play at COP29. So we sit here Monday morning, the second week of the COP. Negotiations have been ongoing in the technical negotiations among parties the past week, and now most of the work will now be handed over to the ministers at the ministerial level, with of course with the leadership of the COP presidency. Now, what we're facing in terms of scenarios here as we go to the home stretch of the negotiations, and in particular, I want to emphasize the centerpiece of COP29, which is finance, the new collective quantified. And if we unpack that, we're talking about a figure, a quantum, as they call it in the negotiations. Why is that quantum important? Well, that is the success of the $100 billion from the Cancun agreements and also translated into the Paris agreements. So the biggest problem with this conversation is that the 100 billion was not delivered on time. That was supposed to arrive in 2020, and we're not talking about an absolute accumulated figure. We're talking about $100 billion per year. Now, looking at how that was delivered across the years, it is deeply concerning that the scale of climate finance that has flowed in the past years give us a grim indication of how it will unfold this week in terms of what that figure might be. Obviously, the needs are huge, and the calculations are in the trillions with respect to how mitigation and adaptation needs to happen across the world in order for us to stay within safe limits. And we're not even talking about the huge amounts required for countries to respond to loss and damage. Now, what we're seeing in these negotiations is parties digging into their trenches last week, just restating all of their old positions, and in particular, developed countries, the rich nations, who refuse to budge in terms of the amounts that they collectively should determine within this COP. Now, we're hearing many different numbers, and if you look at the text as it is right now, you see developed countries putting forward numbers that are way below what is needed, way below 500 billion. There's a range of numbers you will see there. Some are saying 200 billion, some are saying tripling 100 billion, so equivalent to 300 billion. But another problematic aspect to it is the investment goal element that they're putting onto the table. We're not talking about investments here. If countries like the Philippines, which has seen a barrage of unprecedented typhoons in the past weeks, is to join the international efforts to curb greenhouse gases and also be able to cope with the impacts of the climate crisis. We should not be talking about investments here. We should not be talking about leveraging money in order for the private sector to contribute towards solving the crisis. But obviously, the private sector is needed. But what we need to have here at COP29 is the public funding that governments, especially from developed countries, are going to commit. Now, there are a number of contentious elements that hinder progress in the negotiations, into not just the quantum, not just the amount, it's also the quality of this amount. We could arrive at an amount, but it's really bad quality, where you have no clarity on what goes to adaptation, no clarity on the contributor base. And developing countries has made it very clear the contributor base needs to be the developed countries, because that is what is in the Paris Agreement, and that is where finance should flow in accordance with the principles of the Climate Convention. I won't belabor that. But there's also lack of clarity around whether that will be provided or mobilized. These are two different words. Mobilizing is different from providing, and that has been a difficult part of these negotiations. And I think that we can say a lot about the deadlocks happening here. But what is very clear, make no mistake about it, is that developing countries are pushing the process so that the COP would come up with a good outcome. However, developed countries are hindering that progress. Right? They are talking about a lot of conditionalities around climate finance, and they're talking a lot about how that should be related to a bigger private sector involvement in providing finance and mobilizing and providing finance. So the last another important point we're looking at this week is, do we accept a bad deal? Do we accept a bad deal leaving COP29, leaving Baku? Or is it better to have no deal? Now that might mean political decisions will have to be made on the political questions, not just in the finance negotiations, but also in the other important key items in the agenda, including Article 6, carbon markets, as well as on mitigation. So the question before us, not just as civil society, but also for the Philippine delegation here, is whether we would compromise with a really bad deal that would lock us into a very difficult situation to move progress forward. So I just in closing, my appeal and maybe our demand for the Philippine delegation is to keep pushing for developing country interest and for Philippines' national interest in these negotiations. That means that is no less than arriving at an ambitious figure for the quantum and making sure that the quality of climate finance here is sound and is commensurate to what is required. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naderev Saño, Greenpeace Southeast Asia. And in the interest of time, we will have to close this press briefing. For our media colleagues, if you want to ask further questions to any of our 7 panelists for this media briefing, you may approach them afterwards. This is John Leo Algo, National Coordinator of Aksyon Klima Pilipinas, and the moderator for this press briefing. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will announce details of our next press conference. Thank you.